Welcome you all. Good morning, and good morning to day 3 as well of your hack. I delivered this talk about a month ago internally to some people in my team, and the motivation behind it really came from a hack that I participated in earlier in the year, because for so long I had been looking at functions, drawing them in as part of architectures, and doing a line into a box that had the Azure Functions logo in, and then a line coming out of it. And I'd never really had the opportunity to work with them, to get hands-on with them. And it was in a hack environment that I first had that opportunity. And so the aim of this talk really is to share the knowledge, point out how these things work, how you can get started very easily, just to try and reduce the amount of friction it takes when you're coming into something new, so that hopefully you can start to apply them, and not just think of them as a part of your solutions, but actually know how you can pick them up and get started with them yourselves. So, very brief agenda. We'll talk about what they actually are, a little bit about how they work, and then the majority of it will actually be a demonstration of how you can get started from scratch, building out some functions from the ground up. So what are Azure Functions? They're magic. Okay, no, they're not really. They're Azure Functions as a service. Typically, you know we've got IaaS, PaaS. People sometimes refer to this as FaaS or Functions as a service. It's also sometimes called serverless, and it's available on Azure. It's really a programming model that can abstract the complexity of developing and running your applications, and allows you as a developer to think about and program your business logic, and not a lot else. This logic then is it basically can react to events, react to these events at scale as well, and it's built on that core cloud fundamental principle of paying per use. When you start to look into the pricing of these things, you start to understand how ridiculously cheap they are, and so it's I think a really exciting way to start to really benefit from the cloud as part of the solutions that we build. Why are they good? Like I said, you focus on the problem at hand. You think about the business logic, or the unit of work that you want to have performed for you. Write that, and then you don't have to think about a whole lot else. It makes it quicker than ever to deploy these things as well. So when we start to look at some of the tools that are available, you'll see how quickly you can go from nothing to having something up and running. And they're super flexible as well. So I think one of the things that I really like about it is that there are a whole host of different languages that are supported out of the box. And I think that's a testament really to just the direction that Microsoft are going, right, in meeting developers where they are, helping people understand how they can apply these things. And so I've felt, when I've been talking to different people about Azure Functions, people have got a kind of point of view and a background of the programming languages that they perhaps experienced in before, and more often than not, functions are going to support them out of the box. So I think that's really cool as well. Full integration as well with the Azure ecosystem, which is super useful, because there's no use kind of developing these units of work if you can't tie it into other things. And so we start to see and understand how you can really just tie them in to react to these events that are being generated, this data that's landing, these interactions that are happening in your applications, to really adapt them to do whatever you need them to do, and bring your use case to life. The other thing, and I find this with a lot of the things actually, but there are brilliant code examples available in the documentation and on GitHub. So we'll have a look at that as well. So how do they work? What are the concepts that we need to understand? For me, conceptually, there were 3 things that I needed to understand to be dangerous, and these were triggers, bindings, and local debugging. Triggers, if you've looked at this in Data Factory before, it's a very similar sort of concept. the trigger is the event or the circumstance on which we want our function to do the thing. It's a criteria that can be met. Think of things like an incoming request, or you can have a timer, many different things that you can use to trigger the function. Bindings are what you use to connect to things. You can have input bindings and you can have output bindings. And in my experience, this has been really just thinking about where the data or the information or the requests are coming from and where I want them to go to. This could be any of the different services that we've looked at in Azure, and I'll show you in the documentation where you can find all of the references to the different services that you can pick these bindings up for. The final thing was the local debugging. This is a fantastic experience. Honestly, I think it's one of the things that I've enjoyed the most about it. It's very, very satisfying after you've been writing your function to jump in, load up the emulator locally, see your code all running. And I think it's actually one of the reasons I was able to get up and running so fast as well. You don't have to worry so much about your environment or how you're getting these things up into the cloud in order to check that it's working. It's just all running locally. So it certainly helped me. So let's look at a quick example. You could have a trigger, for example, a HTTP request, and this could make your function do a thing. This could be like reading some data from Cosmos DB. And you can combine that with the data that came in as part of that trigger in the request and land that data perhaps into blob storage. Now, this might seem like a trivial piece of work, and doing this is sort of bread and butter of the sorts of applications that we build, starting to tie all of these things together. But with the functions programming model of triggers and bindings, it actually makes it really easy to tie all of these services together in Azure. And I found it just radically improves the development time. Is you don't really lose time sorting out your connection strings. You can start to use those across multiple functions as well. And it handles all of those things like connections, retries, errors, all gracefully. So it makes it very easy for you to just get these things up and running, which I think is actually why it lends itself quite well as well to the hack type environments, because you've got a limited amount of time, right? You just need to focus on having a thing that does the thing, and so using this sort of capability allows you to really hone in on that. So the things that you'll need, I've mentioned the middle one here, the Azure Functions core tools. But Visual Studio Code is a fantastic tool for this. There's an extension as well that we'll be using that you can use to create your functions projects and start to access the different bindings and things, which we'll see. The Functions core tools is a separate download, but you need to have this in order to run the local emulation on your machine. And then you can also use, of course, the Azure CLI to deploy your service, to deploy your function app to a function service or to create a new function service. Generally, just a good tool to have in your box when you're working with Azure. So let's jump into the demonstration, and I'll start by coming to my terminal window here. So like I said, we're going to start from the ground up. We'll create a new directory, and I'll call it partner demo. And let's open Visual Studio Code. Oops, might not work. Oh, that might work. No, okay, that's opened me a text file. Not quite as tidy, Joe. Come along. So Visual Studio Code, if you've not seen it before, we've got all of our icons down the left-hand side, which allows us to access the different pieces of functionality. We're going to focus first on the extensions piece here, and I'll show you the functions extension that you need to download. Just search for functions and you'll find it here. And basically, when you install this into your instance of Visual Studio Code, it essentially gives you a whole bunch of functionality that allows you to build the kind of projects and interact with the services in Azure. There's lots of different extensions that you can download and install into your environment for lots of different services. And this isn't just a Azure or a Microsoft thing. It's fully open, and lots of different people, organizations are contributing extensions here as well. So the first thing I want to do is create a new functions project. So in order to do that, I'm going to jump into the command palette. That's Control-Shift-P. And I'm going to search for functions here. So you can see I get a list of all the different commands. Like I say, these have been enabled by the installation of that extension. And the thing that I want to do is to create a new function. So let's create a new function. It's going to give me an option here saying this is not yet a function project. So we'll create a new project as well while we're here. And I'm going to go for a Python project. I'm going to use my local Python interpreter. Now, this first example that we're going to look at is a HTTP trigger, and I'm just going to write the default name here. I'm not bothered about authorization at this stage. And what that's going to do is essentially give me the scaffolding and the different pieces that I need in order to get up and running. So I want to highlight 3 key files here that you need to know about in order to really start working with these. Now, the first of these is the local.settings.json. This is a file where you can start to provide connection strings to your different services. And you need to essentially populate this file with those connection strings so that when you're running the function emulation locally, you can actually talk to those services in Azure and see that it's working. The next one is the function.json. In here, you define those bindings that we were talking about earlier. So we'll see how these work and how you can use the command palette to add into these. And I'll show you in the documentation where you can see the references for these too. But just note that in the function.json file, this is where you define those bindings to the different services, and you give them names that you can then reference in your function file. The final one is the init.py, and this is where your business logic lives. So you can see we've got a main function here. This is what's triggered when we interact with that function. And you can see we've got some simple logic here that's going to take a name parameter and return a HTTP response to us. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to press F5 to run debugging. And what this is going to do is start that local emulator and run this function essentially on an endpoint on my local machine so that I can start to interact with it. You see I get an endpoint here. It's running on port 7071. And if I click onto here, you'll see we get a response. It's going to ask me to pass a name into the query string, so I can do that here. I can say name equals Joe. And now you can see we're cascading through that business logic where it's finding my name, it's parsing that, and passing me my response with my name in that response as well. So all very good. We're off to a good start. Next thing we want to do is perhaps think about how we can start to integrate this with some business logic. So what if we wanted to start to integrate with some of our other services to start to do something more interesting? Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new function. I'm going to do the same thing, go into my command palette, create a new function. And then in this case, I still want to have a HTTP trigger. We'll go with HTTP trigger 2. But now what I want to do with this new function is create a new binding to a service called Azure Event Hubs. So again, I'll come to my command palette. We'll go to add binding. I want to add this on my new binding here. My new function, sorry. This is an output binding to an Event Hubs. We'll write the default for the Event Hub message name. And we're going to need a setting in our Event Hub JSON. So this is going to automatically populate that local settings file. So what we'll do, we'll create a new one there. And we want to create a binding to an Event Hub that I already have, right? So I'm going to jump into my subscription, and you can see it's now giving me the options of the different Event Hubs that I have. I'm going to select my Functions Demo Event Hub, and in here I've got an Event Hub within that namespace there. So we'll select that. It's now asking me for a policy. Now, this is something that I've already created. Within your event hubs, you can have policies that allow your applications to communicate with that event hub instance. You can have send policies, which allow you to send messages into that event hub, and you can have listen policies as well, which allow you to consume the events from that. So because in this example, what I want to do is use my HTTP trigger to send events in, I'm going to use a policy that's already defined there that allows me that access into the event hub. So I'll select my send rule there. Now, when we do that, you can see a few things have changed. So on my function.json, I've now got this output binding. So exactly the same as we had in the first example here, but now we've got this output binding down at the bottom. This name, the output event hub message, we'll come to this, and this is what we're going to use in order to reference our business logic and tie the function itself into this output binding. If I come to my local settings.json as well, you can see I've actually got this automatically populated for me, but this is my connection string out to the event hub, and it's this secret that the functions worker is going to use in order to communicate with that event hub. I'll come back now to the function itself, and let's write some additional logic here. So we've got that request coming in. We now want to bind that to that output. And in order to do this, I'm just going to, in fact, I'll need the name of that binding. So we'll take the output event hub message, and this is going to essentially, we'll use this name to reference it in our business logic. So if I put this into my main function here and set this to the func.out, this is our out class as part of the functions library. And because this is going to be a string, we're just going to pass that in like that. The next thing to do, I want to add some additional functionality here. So as well as your name, I want you to be able to send me a message. So let's add a message capability. And we're going to get this from the parameters. Not incredibly Pythonic, I know, but save time, we'll just add this on like this. And we'll have very similar logic here as well. So if we've not got a message, try and get that from a JSON. If not, then return an error. And our message will equal our message. Finally, if we've got a name and a message, then what I want to do is use the set function on our output. So we'll do our output.set, and this is going to set it to that string that's going to be a combination of that name and our message. So let's get our name in here, our name and our message. Okay, and let's just update this as well here. So please pass in a name and message so that everybody knows what to do. So you can see now we've updated our function. We've got some additional functionality here so that people can pass not just a name, but a message as well. And we are using our event hub binding to pass that data from the incoming HTTP request down into our event hub. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to cross my fingers and I'm going to press F5 and hope that this all works as expected. So we're starting our local emulation here now. You can see we've got both of these endpoints stood up. And let's have a go at hitting this endpoint here. So I've got my HTTP trigger 2. It looks like this is working as expected, and it's asking me to pass in a name and a message. So let's do exactly that. Name equals Joe. And let's use one that I've already got. Let's do message equals hello there. So it looks like that's working as expected. So that's useful. The next thing we want to see is how do we actually deploy this into Azure so that we can start to have an endpoint that's available to other people to use. The way we can do this is, again, by using our extension. When we start to install the extensions for Azure, you'll get this Azure button on the left here as well. And if we jump in here, you'll see I've got a few different extensions actually, but we'll focus on the functions one for today. And here I can start to navigate through the subscriptions I have available to me. You can create new functions here if you want. And this is actually the function, a bit of a Blue Peter moment, but one that I've created earlier that we'll use just to kind of round off the demo here. Because functions is based on app service, you have all of those sorts of concepts as well, like deployment slots. So that's quite useful if you want to, deploy to a development slot before you overwrite your main production slot. And there are a few ways that you can deploy your function. You can right click on the service and click deploy to function app. There's a neat button here. You can also use the Azure CLI to do this as well. And when you do that, we'll take a look in the portal here. You get your function app, and you start to see that logic appear under the functions piece here. So you can see I've got my HTTP triggers. The other piece I want to point out here as well is the configuration. So this is where you go to find those application settings that we were looking at in that local.settings.json. These will be uploaded into the application settings here. And if you need to change those or update those to point to different environments, this is where you come in order to do that. Okay, so let's now see if you can all interact with this function itself. So what I'm going to do is come back to my presentation, and I'll share this link actually in the chat, but you should all be able to communicate here with this. So let me see here. I'm going to get the string from my it's actually in my presentation notes here, so bear with me. Come in here. This endpoint should now be available to you all, and you should be able to communicate with this and send me a little message. I'm going to paste this in the chat. And what I've got here as well is a little receiver that's running to consume these messages from the Event Hub. So we may see some of your messages coming through. You can see here there's that one that I sent through a little earlier, but hopefully we'll see some messages coming through. Awesome. Hi, Richard. Hi, Rafi. There we go. Cool. So I'll revisit that later, but let's wrap up now. So the key takeaways here, there are a few. So remember this: triggers are the things that make things happen. Bindings are the things that define your inputs and your outputs. The Azure CLI is great. We didn't get to that as part of the demo, but just a general comment, I suppose. With these Azure functions, there are three key files that you need to remember. It's the local.settings.json. This is where you store your secrets locally. The function.json. This is where you define those triggers and bindings. And the init.py for your Python code. This is where you define that business logic. There are, of course, other languages available as well. Once you've got that stood up, F5 for debugging and running that locally in your Visual Studio Code. And as we saw, you can deploy straight to the function app using the extension, by right-clicking on the service or by clicking the little deploy button. There's also a link here that I've included that we didn't take a look at, but I'll just jump into it now. This is a library where communities are, well, people all over are contributing boilerplate templates, and it's a great place to start as well if you've got something that you think you want to do. this can be a good kind of starting point where you can search for different pieces of functionality that people may have already written. You can filter on language or services that you're interested in integrating, and it can be really useful to help you get started too. So that concludes the talk. Maybe a bit more of a rolling thunder talk than a lightning talk, but I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out in the chat. I'm around as well for the rest of the day, helping support Robin and the team with this. So that's all I've got for you today. Thanks very much all for your time, and hope to speak to you at some point again in the future. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Joe.
No problem.